It was the kind of night that splits a life clean in two. One moment I was standing beneath a flickering hospital light, hands still stained with the blood I didn't realize was mine, and the next I was staring into the hollow chest of a reality I hadn't prepared for. My sister Ray had just died, car crash, drunk driver. The kind of sentence that gets thrown around so often that it loses its weight until it's about your person. Ray wasn't just my sister, she was my anchor, my voice of reason, my proof that I wasn't crazy when I felt like the whole world was lying about how to live. And just like that, she was gone. A hollowing silence followed me into the corridor where I collapsed, not dramatically, not like in the movies, just slowly, like my bones had given up pretending they could carry me anymore. That's where he found me, a stranger in a paramedic jacket, eyes kind but unreadable, kneeling beside me with the kind of careful grace that said he'd done this 1,000 times before. I didn't even notice he was holding my hand until I realized I was squeezing his like a lifeline. He said his name was Caleb. I couldn't tell if I hated him for being so calm or loved him for not saying, "I'm sorry for your loss." But here's the twist no one talks about: grief makes you reckless. It frays your edges until all the rules blur into suggestions. 2 weeks after Ray's funeral, I showed up at the ER with a busted lip from a bar fight I didn't even win. Caleb was there again, same jacket, same tired eyes. He stitched me up without a word, his hands firm but gentle, and I hated the way my heart caught in my throat. Because no one tells you how confusing it is when something as devastating as loss cracks you open just enough for something new to slip in. I wasn't looking for anything, least of all him, but the strangest thing, it didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like remembering something I'd tried to forget, something warm, familiar, dangerous. I didn't know it yet, but Caleb had secrets too, ones that would change everything. It was an ordinary day, well, as ordinary as life can be after losing someone you thought you'd never live without. I was wandering the aisles of a bookstore, aimlessly searching for a distraction. The bookshelves around me seemed to hum with noise, though the world outside felt muffled, distant. I was just about to leave when I saw him again, Caleb, his figure half hidden by a row of poetry collections, absorbed in a hardcover book as if he'd been there forever. Our eyes met for the briefest second, and the air around us cracked with something unspoken. He didn't smile, I didn't either. Instead, we stood there, suspended between strangers and something more. I almost turned and left, convinced it was a sign that grief had somehow become a permanent companion in my life. But then he spoke, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "You look like you're hunting for something you'll never find," he said, the edge of his words cutting through the dense fog of my mind. I was stunned, caught off guard by his bluntness, but also by the way it felt like he was seeing right through me. "You always come here to hide from the world." I didn't have a response, I just nodded. And that was how it started. That was how we began, two people who didn't belong in this world anymore, caught in the orbit of something more fragile than either of us wanted to admit. As the weeks passed, we crossed paths in the bookstore, at the coffee shop, on rainy nights when neither of us could sleep. We didn't speak much about Ray. I didn't want to hear it, but Caleb seemed to understand that, and somehow that made everything hurt more. Because he didn't push me to grieve, didn't demand I talk. Instead, he did this strange thing where he stayed quiet and let me piece together my own sense of self again, slowly, cautiously, like I was fragile glass. And in return, I began to notice the cracks in him, the bruises underneath his skin that I couldn't see but could feel. One evening, over a cup of coffee that had gone cold between us, he said something that changed everything. "I'm not who you think I am," he said, and his voice didn't waver. It was matter of fact, like an admission. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but the weight of his words hung between us like the moment before a storm breaks. My stomach twisted, an instinctive dread rushing through me, and I suddenly realized I was holding on to him in a way that terrified me, because I wasn't sure if I was falling for him or if I was trying to avoid the gaping hole that had opened when Ray died. But it didn't matter because Caleb didn't give me the chance to ask questions. He just looked at me like he wanted to say more but stopped himself. And it was then I realized I wasn't the only one running from something. The turning point came 2 weeks later when the air between Caleb and me thickened to a point of unbearable tension. One night I ran into him outside the bookstore again, only this time he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, her laughter light, too easy, and her fingers wrapped around his wrist in a way that sent something jagged shooting through me. I didn't mean to stare, but I couldn't help it. There was an intimacy there, one that felt foreign in the space I thought was mine. Caleb's gaze flickered to mine, and for a split second the world around us collapsed, revealing the truth that had been sitting just beneath the surface. He didn't love me, not like that, not yet. The shock hit me harder than I anticipated because in the quiet of my heart I had convinced myself otherwise. I swallowed the lump that formed in my throat and forced a smile, trying to shake off the sting. "Hey, Caleb," I said, though the words tasted like ash. The woman, noticing the tension, excused herself and drifted into the crowd, leaving the two of us alone. He stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't know you were." "Dating," I added, not sure why it sounded like a question. Caleb's eyes darkened, and for the first time his walls came crashing down. "She's not," he started, but then stopped himself, running a hand through his hair as if searching for the right words. "She's a friend, more like a past, it doesn't matter." I wanted to tell him that it did matter, that the sharpness in my chest was proof that it did, but I couldn't, not when I wasn't even sure what this us was supposed to be in the first place. "I'm not good at this, any of it," Caleb continued, his voice raw, strained. "I've never been good at being with anyone, especially after," he trailed off, and for a moment the air felt as heavy as it had the day Ray died. "I hurt people, I hurt myself." His words hit me like a slap to the face, but they also dug a hole deep enough to bury my pride. I wanted to shout, to demand he explain what that meant, but I couldn't. Because in that moment I realized I wasn't the only one carrying a weight. Caleb's pain wasn't something I could fix, and mine wasn't something he could save me from. And yet, in the silence that followed, I felt this strange pull towards him, this inexplicable urge to stay, to wait for him to finish what he had started, even if I had no idea what the ending looked like. Maybe that was the dangerous part. We were both so broken, yet somehow in each other we felt a kind of raw connection, the kind that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. Caleb and I hadn't spoken after that night, and every time I thought about reaching out, the weight of his words stopped me. He hurt people, he hurt himself. I knew what he meant, even without the details. Because when you carry enough scars, you recognize the ones others hide under their skin. But there was a part of me, maybe the desperate part, that wanted to believe we could somehow fix each other. That maybe this tangled mess of grief and regret could somehow become something more. I don't know if that was hope or delusion, but it was all I had left. And then on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was setting, he showed up at my apartment. No warning, no message. Just Caleb standing at my doorstep like an unexpected storm. He was different this time, his eyes red, his expression raw, like he had fought against something that nearly swallowed him whole. "I can't do this," he said, his voice shaky, his words barely audible. "I can't keep pretending I'm fine. I can't keep pretending I'm not falling for you." He didn't give me a chance to react before he added, "But I'm a mess, and I don't want to drag you down with me." For the first time, I saw the real Caleb, the one he kept hidden behind his quiet mask. The one I'd sensed all along but never fully understood, and suddenly everything made sense. His distance, his hesitation, the way he'd pulled back when I leaned in. He wasn't afraid of falling in love with me. He was afraid of destroying me in the process. That kind of fear I recognized. It was the same kind of fear that had kept me from facing my own grief. The kind that told me if I let someone in, I'd be exposing myself to something too dangerous, too volatile. But here's the twist. In that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of Caleb's brokenness, his fears, his flaws, because in a way they mirrored mine, and maybe that was the point. Maybe falling in love with him wasn't about saving each other. It was about learning to live with the mess, with the scars, with the pieces we couldn't glue back together. I stepped forward, closing the gap between us, and whispered, "I'm not afraid of you, Caleb. I'm afraid of never knowing what this could be." He didn't say anything at first, but when he finally reached out and cupped my face in his hands, I knew. I knew then that this was the gift I never expected, because in him I found the kind of love that didn't try to fix, didn't try to erase, it simply accepted, and that was enough. The days that followed felt like a slow, careful unraveling. Caleb and I didn't rush, maybe because neither of us had the energy to pretend we knew what we were doing. Instead, we allowed ourselves the luxury of being messy, imperfect, and fragile. We spent hours talking about nothing and everything at once, the kind of conversations that didn't need to make sense because they made us feel something real. Sometimes we would sit in silence, both of us trying to find the words for the things we couldn't say out loud. But those moments, the ones where nothing happened and everything happened, were the ones that anchored me to him. But it wasn't all easy. There were nights when Caleb's past would surface, dark and jagged, threatening to swallow him whole. The nights when the demons that lived in his eyes would rise up and I would have to hold him while he whispered, "I don't deserve this, I don't deserve you." Those were the nights I saw the broken parts of him I wasn't sure I could heal, and yet somehow I stayed. I stayed because I understood the depth of his struggle, the way pain can stretch you thin, the way it makes you question whether you're worthy of anything good. And I knew deep down that I wasn't just staying for him. I was staying for me too. Because in him I saw the same battle I fought in the silence of my own heart, the fear of loving someone so fully that it leaves you raw and exposed, vulnerable to the hurt that might come with it. Then one morning, months later, I woke up to an empty bed. Caleb was gone, no note, no message, just the quiet hum of a world that felt too still, too perfect in its silence. I was devastated at first, the panic rising like a tide, until I remembered the way he had always been, someone who couldn't hold on to anything for too long without feeling like he might suffocate under its weight. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't lost in the dark. This time I knew better. Caleb was always running, always trying to outrun the things he couldn't face. But I wasn't running anymore, not from him, not from myself. Hours passed before the door opened, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his face softened by something I hadn't seen before, peace. It wasn't a grand gesture, no apology, just him standing there like he had finally come back to himself. I don't have all the answers, he said, his voice steady. But I know that I want this, I want us. And with that, everything shifted. It wasn't the perfect ending, but it was real. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anything more. Falling in love with Caleb had never been part of my plan. It had never been something I expected or asked for. But now, as I stood in the doorway of our shared future, I understood. This was the gift I never expected. And it wasn't about the love that fixed us. It was about the love that let us break over and over and still choose each other despite everything. The kind of love that made us better in all the ways that truly mattered, imperfect, scarred, and completely ours.